So now we're going to start with the panelist discussion. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have 4 industry experts. And Christopher Pollock is our first panelist. Christopher Pollock is a partner and regional director for the Washington, D.C. office of Cerami & Associates. He's a licensed professional engineer as well as a certified technology specialist. And he's here today to share with us his 15 years of experience in the field of acoustics, noise, vibration consulting, HVAC noise control, footfall noise control, sound insulation in all areas of construction, including K through 12 and higher education. Welcome, Christopher. Our second panelist is Edward Duggar. Edward Duggar is the founder of Edward Duggar & Associates and a member of the American Institute of Architects. He specializes in architectural acoustics and has consulted on projects such as the New World Symphony in Miami, Florida, which was designed by Frank Gehry, and the state-of-the-art Max Planck Research Facility in Jupiter, Florida. He's a member of the Acoustical Society of America, the National Council of Acoustical Consultants, and the Institute of Noise Control Engineering of the USA. Our third panelist is Alana Dunoff. Alana Dunoff is a strategic planning facility planner and president of AFD Facility Planning, a consulting firm offering a full array of strategic facility planning services. She is a fellow with the International Facility Management Association and has more than 12 years been the adjunct professor for Temple University School of Architecture and at Villanova University, where she teaches IFMA's Facility Management Professional Credential course. Our final panelist today is Dawn Schutte. Dawn Schutte is a partner at the Threshold Acoustics in Chicago. She's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, and she's been involved with renovation of numerous performing arts facilities, including Orchestra Hall Chicago at the Symphony Center, facilities for the Conservatory of Music at Lawrence University, and the master plan for the Academy, which is a program of the Carnegie Hall. She's also been with the Juilliard School and the Weill Music Institute. I'd like to welcome all of our panelists, and we'll go ahead and start right with a few questions. I'm going to open the first question up to just anybody who would like to respond, and if somebody has a definite feeling about it, I'd ask that you mention your name first so we know who's speaking. The first question is, are school authorities acknowledging the importance of acoustic design when planning for new classrooms and other core learning spaces?
It just depends on the school district. Some of the school districts that we deal with are and this is a very important issue, and some don't even care, honestly. Sometimes we get the impression. So.
And this is Dawn. I just wanted to also say the biggest challenge I think that we find when we're working on facilities like this is the challenge of budget versus the whole range of things that happen during design, whether it be the architectural character of the building, the acoustic design, the state of the HVAC systems. All of these come under tremendous scrutiny when challenged by budget requirements, and so that's what we find is the hardest thing. I don't know that it's typically not a priority on acoustics. It's trying to figure out how to balance it within the budgets that are given to a lot of these local authorities.
Unfortunately, I could see that happening as working in an architect office. This is Mark again. I know that I did see budget seem to take precedent sometimes when push came to shove. Our second question, what trends are you seeing in design and educational facilities, and how does this compare to 5 to 10 years ago? I guess what trends are you seeing that are kind of, what direction are we heading toward? Dawn?
Sure. We see a lot of trends. We see this actually not just in education facilities, but we're seeing it a lot in even office space design. Is the idea of trying to open things up, give the maximum amount of height and light into spaces, and sometimes what that's pushing, or very often what it's pushing, is a lack of a ceiling, of a finished ceiling that architects want to expose up to the structure. There was even a photo early on in the presentation when Robert was giving it, showing this really nice light-filled cafeteria, and you notice that it just had a metal deck and there was no ceiling in the space, and it had a large glass wall. So those are things that we have to work with architects to figure out how to achieve that vision while incorporating absorptive treatments.
Yeah, this is Chris. I would second that. The other thing we're seeing as a trend is teachers understanding the differences in how kids are learning and how students are learning, in that there's not only a classroom where a teacher is speaking, but also there's a need for one-on-one spaces, and there's a need for group learning spaces where a little more interactive learning is part of the process. And the design, both architectural and acoustics, has to support each of those different modes of learning, and that's true in the classroom or educational environment and in the workplace, where one-on-one or group or teaching is is changing the way that we interact with each other.
This is Mark again. That's interesting, because I guess what I'm getting at is it seemed like years ago, I guess it was either gymnasiums or big, large spaces and then small classrooms, and now they're getting much more specialized into it. It sounds like more unique spaces and everything like that, which I think is a good thing. And I do agree with what Don said about I've seen that too in a lot of buildings. You're seeing a lot of these open space structures where there really is no ceiling. And I'll be honest, I never thought about the acoustical challenges that must present. Our third question, I'd like to direct to Edward Duggar. This question is classroom acoustic design being sacrificed because of budget constraints? I think we already heard kind of the answer to that, but let's expand on that. What suggestions might you make for architects and designers facing acoustical design challenges for education spaces, especially when it comes to improving acoustics on a public education budget? Edward?
Yeah, it is being sacrificed, but I think in the scheme of things, if you actually look at the overall budget of the project and the finishes and everything else, you actually kind of figure out that it doesn't. It's it's in the 1 or 2 or 3% of the cost of the total school. So a lot of times what we can do is suggested. We've taken people and kind of have them experience bad teaching classes. Usually, if there's a teacher in the group, they'll speak right up and get into it. But I think it's helpful to let everybody understand, that it is quite an important part of what we're trying to accomplish here. And in the scheme of things, the 1 or 2 or 3% is not that much to overcome, So.
Edward, I could see that being a big. I mean, it's kind of like the old saying, "A picture's worth 1,000 words." I guess this is hearing is worth everything. If they actually went and experienced one of those bad classrooms, I think that would drive the point home to them.
Right, and we a lot of times, and I'm sure the other people on the thing too, we have used oralizations, they're called. Essentially, kind of you can put headphones on and you experience these things very quickly and understand, just like some of the demos that didn't work earlier today on this thing. They're very helpful in terms of trying to teach people what they're trying to get at, rather than such an abstraction. So, okay.
Excellent. Our fourth question I'd like to direct to Chris Pollock. Chris, what methodologies for improving acoustics in renovation projects where noise-producing HVAC equipment cannot be relocated or moved out of the classroom?
Sure. This is often a difficulty when we're talking about renovations of schools and classrooms. There's two general approaches that we take, where there is some equipment that's HVAC related in a classroom. We look at construction changes that we might make and operational changes that we might make. And from a construction standpoint, if there's if there's equipment in the ceiling that's making that noise, one of the things we might do is modify the ceiling to a high CAC ceiling tile, where that ceiling tile can block the noise from coming down through the ceiling into the classroom. We also might wrap any terminal boxes or enclose those terminal boxes up in the ceiling to stop that noise coming through. And then from an operational standpoint, often we can maybe change the units out or modify them so that, rather than looking at just the noise from a convection unit, we might enclose that convection unit. We might look at the fan speed and see if we can't slow the fan down or modify the fan speed. There are new fan and motor combinations that have electronic control modules that give us a little more efficiency and control, so we can slow the fan down and create less noise. And there's some new technologies as well with classroom units and terminal units that are variable refrigerant flow, or VRF systems, and also DOAS, dedicated outside air systems, that can limit the amount of airflow that's needed and thus generate less noise overall. But really, it takes a perspective on how the units are operating, and rather than assuming they must operate that way, just asking questions about, do we need all of these things to operate that way, and how might we mitigate some of that noise.
So it sounds like you kind of have to take sort of a holistic approach of it. You have to kind of look at all the factors and kind of combine them together and see which, maybe even a combination of each. If you could, isolate them a little bit, maybe update a few of the equipment, and kind of.
Exactly.
Oh, very good.
Exactly.
Number 5, I think, was kind of a play on that, was, and I'll go ahead and stick with you, Chris, on this, if you don't mind. Would this be the most, and anybody else who wants to add in on this, are there any, would this be the most challenging aspects of design for the retrofit and renovation projects when it comes to improving the acoustics in the classroom? I mean, we've heard that. Are there any other, I guess we're looking for what's the most challenging aspect?
If things are historic, or if there's reason from an architectural historic standpoint to maintain finishes in the room, that can be very challenging. A lot of times there's existing plaster or historic ceilings and wall finishes that can be modified. That's often difficult to reduce the reverberation time without adding some finishes. And the second thing that we often come up against is outside noise with traffic noise or aircraft noise from outside the classroom coming in through windows that are not designed for noise control. And I think one of the things that LEED has really brought to the attention of design teams is all of those things really play into the performance of the space from an acoustic standpoint.
That's very interesting. I wouldn't have thought about the historic aspect, but that does bring up a good point. I actually recently traveled Europe and was going through some old castles where they're just stone and hard plaster, beautiful, murals painted on hard plaster. But I have to tell you, the reverberation noise in there, listening to people would have been extremely challenging. But what do you do with the historic ambiance of it? It's kind of that's got to be a real challenge for an acoustical person to deal with.
Right, and this is Dawn. I just wanted to add one thing to that we find is also in a lot of those historic buildings that have all plaster finishes, is that they're also higher floor-to-ceiling ratio. So in a lot of the presentations that Robert showed, it was indicating a 10-foot floor-to-ceiling as a typical. But we are finding some of the historic schools in Chicago, they actually have 12 or 14-foot ceilings in some of these spaces, which makes it even more challenging because they're also then bigger volumes.
Huh, that would make sense. Number 6, this is for Dawn, so we're going to keep you on the hot spot here, Dawn. Education facilities have often mixed functions or include a broad range of facilities, such as performance halls, lecture halls, rehearsal space, and classrooms side by side. In the initial design process, what value might an independent acoustical consultant bring to the table when addressing acoustical issues unique to these combined environments?
We very quickly look at some of these kind of disparate needs and want to identify strategies for providing buffer spaces wherever possible between spaces that are very loud or spaces that need to be quiet or have a large group, like a lecture hall, a large group being spoken to. Because this gets at some of the issues that Robert was talking about the signal-to-noise ratio as well. If too much sound comes through the wall, we've raised the background noise level in those spaces, making it difficult for education to happen. So particularly in music rehearsal spaces or in performance halls that could get very loud, we make sure that we find ways of inserting storage spaces, other needed program spaces between rooms, or advising the architects on the types of wall systems, if there isn't a way to do a buffer space, to make sure that even early on we're providing enough plan area to be able to get a really good wall system in between two spaces to make sure they're not interfering with each other. In addition to that, though, one of the most critical things is looking at HVAC systems to make sure that ductwork isn't communicating between rooms that have very disparate needs as well.
Yes, no.
Chris, I would add that a lot of times, especially in K through 12 environments, that the room isn't just for one thing. There's multi-function rooms, and as Dawn had said, early in that design process, we need to evaluate what the room is for, because it might be a cafeteria, a gym, and a lecture hall, or some combination of functions, and maybe building in flexibility from an acoustic standpoint as part of that discussion as well, so that, you know, on a certain time of day it operates as a gym, and another time of day it's an auditorium, and the acoustics in the space can change to support those two different needs.
Absolutely. We've had this experience recently where the cafeteria has to also be the place where they do major banquets, particularly related to sports events and sports teams in this one high school. So it helped knowing that information early on. We carried throughout the entire design process the importance of some of the treatments in that room that maybe wouldn't have been given as much priority if it was just a cafeteria. But as we talked about the fact that, well, you know, this is what you're going to have to do when you have the banquets and you're going to have presentations and the types of things that would happen there, they acknowledge the priority on maintaining the acoustic conditions.
You know, I was just thinking, would the Lombard effect, which Robert Marshall talked about, you know, the idea when, you know, things get louder, we get louder. I was just thinking, I was imagining in a room, and I've been in rooms like that, meeting rooms where you can hear the people in there, so you get louder, then they get louder. Then pretty soon you've got each room just shouting to try to, so everybody in their room can hear what they're saying. And I would just, is that something you guys take into account? You think about the Lombard effect with those? And that's the importance of the buffer room then, the buffer space.
It's part the importance of the buffer space, but also that's a key issue for spaces such as cafeteria spaces. That a cafeteria can get just out of control because of exactly that problem if there aren't treatments in the space.
Very good. Our seventh question is for Alana. Alana, is it possible to see a dramatic improvement in acoustics and reverberation time in a retrofit situation when dealing with reflective surfaces such as concrete floors and limitations such as overhead sprinkler system that prevents designing a ceiling solution?
So the short answer is yes, but I want to take everyone back and tell you a little bit about my background of how I can even answer that question. I am an adjunct professor. I have been for about 12 years, and I'm currently working at Temple University in the Facilities Management Department, and that is part of the School of Architecture. And in 2001, very excited, we got a brand new building on the Temple University campus. And as part of the new Facilities Management Department, we got our own 1,000 square foot sort of teaching lab space, which we were really very excited about. But the building was done in a way that was very Canvas-like for the architecture students. So concrete floors, high ceilings, exposed ceilings, homosoap walls. And so I walk in my first day of class to my new 1,000 square foot room, and I knew immediately this was not going to be a room that might be great for pinup space, but not a great room for teaching and talking and really having seminar space. And as I expected, that first class was dreadful. My ears hurt after my 3-hour lecture in class. I was walking up to students to try to hear what they were saying in the space. And I thought immediately, well, this wasn't part of my syllabus, but we have a real facilities management problem here. We need to fix this space. And I thought, well, I've got the students, and we've got the space, and hopefully the latitude to make see if we can make some changes, or at least understand why the room is not a productive learning environment for a teacher or for a student. And I was able to fortunately get in contact with the folks at CertainTeed who came in for sort of a learning experience with the students where they tested the space and learned all about reverberation and surfaces and what the issues were in the space, which really were quite numerous. And then we went through kind of once we understood the problems, what the possible solutions were. And one was we had initially talked about was dropping some kind of cloud from the ceiling which was the path we sort of went down until the fire marshal within the Temple University said the sprinklers would not allow us to do that. So we were sort of back to the drawing board and sort of figuring out what kind of solution we could use, and then we sort of came upon the wall panel product, which was a pretty exciting idea, option for us, because one of the things about the space is we also needed tappable surfaces, and so here was this new product that we could use and try in our room, and the students were involved in designing it and creating it and actually even installing it, which means it's super easy to do. And we had a day where the entire day the students came in, forgot their regular classes, and got involved in the whole process of putting together the panels as well, and it really sort of transformed our room. And so in the end, we had these great panels, and I will tell you, we are now the IT room in this building because it's a space that we can actually have seminars in. I've had now 40, 50 people in for student presentations, which they give quite often, and we can hear each other, we can talk, and so it really has been a great opportunity for us that we're really grateful for, the partnering that we did with CertainTeed.
Wow, that was great. I love to hear stories are always great like that, real life ones, especially ones that go from bad to excellent. Went from what I gather went from one of the worst rooms to one of the best. Which I want to ask, do you think that was obviously you said it was built new, I think in 2001, and it was like a canvas budget. Was it because of the budget constraints that it was so bad in the beginning, or was it just a lack of oversight, a little of both, or do you have any knowledge on that?
I do. It was actually a little bit of both. One was the tackable surfaces that are sort of out there as a design product are these gray, ugly tackable surfaces that are supposed to also have sound absorption quality, but they painted them white. So there went any absorption in those, but it also was a budget constraint, which they acknowledged very, very early on, that they just were not able to do certain things because of the fast track of the project, of building the building and getting it done for school. And so we were left to our own desires to figure out how to fix it. So both of those factors played a huge role.
Wow, that's great. The other thing that you mentioned was about clouds, ceiling clouds, and I've always thought of ceiling clouds as being very, I mean, they're very architecturally appealing. I think people like to have them. They look good. I never thought of them as being, and if I understood correctly, they can actually be an acoustical benefit to a building by just putting a cloud up there. Is that correct?
So my understanding is yes, and I'll probably let one of the experts sort of pop in here. I've seen it actually in a project that I was involved in some other work that I have done where they really can be effective. Perhaps someone else can add to some of those, more of those properties too.
Yeah, this is Chris with Ceramic. Yeah, absolutely. Introducing a ceiling doesn't mean a continuous plane of wall-to-wall acoustical ceiling tile. It might mean that 50 or 60 or 70% of the space is covered, and the remainder is provided with gaps that might allow for things like lights or HVAC or sprinklers to pop down through, so that fire marshal or other people are happy. It also could be baffles that are hung vertically rather than a horizontal plane. It's they're hung vertically, and a ceiling solution isn't always simply a grid that's continuous from side to side. And then you augment that with wall panels, and you may end up with a really great sounding room.
And this is Dawn. One of the things about ceiling clouds, depending on how far they are supported off of the structure up above, is that we can achieve a better acoustic benefit than just the square footage alone would indicate from those kind of RT calculations that Robert was presenting, because sound can move around the clouds as well. So some of that area that in theory is not treated actually does have an effect of acoustic absorption around a cloud. And that's where an acoustical consultant can really help to educate and give the architects options, because we can make those kinds of value judgments.
Wow, that's great. That actually kind of leads into question 8. Our next question is how important is the balance of aesthetics with acoustics, which I think is what we're talking about, trying to meet the architect's dreams to have something like I said, the clouds and things like that with acoustics when it comes to education projects. Should function trump form in this instance? Anybody like to kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, as I say, I think, I know Dawn and I are architects. I think, Mark, if I'm not mistaken, you are too. So I know in our practice, and certainly when I used to work with Dawn, it's an opportunity to work with an architect to come up with something new and different. I don't think we're constrictive. I think we're actually helpful in terms of just making sure, if nothing else, going in the right direction, or as the famous word is adult supervision, in design process. But, I don't think we're hurting the process. We're actually helping the design process by being there at the table. So.
Yeah, this is Chris. I was going to say, I think the products that are available on the market today in terms of acoustical finishes, really, this either-or decision isn't really an either-or decision. There's basically a product or an option to solve every problem, both from an acoustical standpoint or an aesthetic standpoint. And in addition to that, the LEED process for schools has now made classroom acoustics elevated in people's minds. So it's never an afterthought. It's always there as a prerequisite. We know we have to achieve these performance values. It's just a matter of how and with what products and what approaches.
And this is Dawn. I think also the best designers want to achieve good function along with the form that they create, and they acknowledge that the acoustic requirements of these spaces is one of the key components of the function, that it's not just about the space layout, that there are other aspects that make a building successful. So the best designers actually want to find a good way to incorporate these things, even though they might also be trying to push the form or the visual aesthetics of a space.
I think those are excellent answers, and I think they're good points, and I agree with you from an architect's point of view. We want to build beautiful buildings, but we want them to function too. There's no reason why they shouldn't do both. That's the ultimate goal. And I do think acoustical consultants can be very helpful in that. Number 9, our question, what are the most important factors to consider when selecting materials for superior acoustic performance in educational facilities? Maybe Alana could start with that because she's deals directly with educational facilities and lives in that world. Do you have an opinion on that, Alana?
So, in my role in facilities, I'm a little bit less on the product side, but I will tell you that one of the experiences that we've had through this whole piece is that giving the students real options to touch and feel and understand products and qualities, and having sort of access to materials and the knowledge base of just the outside industry coming in and presenting what's out there for their own learning. So I apologize, I don't have the specifics from that standpoint, but the engagement process has really was a critical part of this all for us.
Yeah, this is Chris again. I think the first step in that process is really to look at any guidelines that the school board may have. We do work with the School Construction Authority in New York and the DC public school system here in DC, and there are requirements that there's longevity and other things that have to go into the product, so that when we're selecting things that are in classrooms and reachable, and they may be impacted by furniture or other activities throughout the day, they have to stand up to those things in addition to providing the acoustical performance that we're looking for. So it's both functional requirements and acoustical requirements and aesthetic requirements that are all on the table.
And this is Dawn. I think a couple of things that come into play too are the age of the students and the use of the rooms, because in addition to a specific requirement from a municipality, it's just clear that if we're working with young children or it's an art room or something, that we have a different palette of materials because of the nature of the use of the room. They just can't get wet, or they have to be able to withstand getting wet or be able to take abuse. So that's one thing. Another thing that we also look at in choosing materials is where the materials are going to be placed and what the configuration of the room is, because the reverberation time calculation that was presented is a great initial tool, but the importance of understanding that if a configuration has a room much higher than is typical, say as maybe in a shop or in an art room, that we have to not just treat the ceiling, we have to also look at the walls and their treatment, because they are such an enormous portion of the volume of the room, and they have a tremendous impact on the sound. So we also have to look at the configuration as well.
Very good, interesting. our last question we've got is, does sustainability have a significant impact on your choice of ceiling or other interior products, and our long-term life cycle cost a consideration? I think we'll open it up to everybody that wants to, how much we will think about sustainability and long-term life cycling costing.
For sustainability, absolutely. I mean, we internally keep a list of products that will meet some of the LEED requirements. We also keep some understanding of where things are manufactured and so on, so that the energy cost of getting them to and from a site is maintained. And I think architects and design teams are very savvy in understanding this today. So in terms of sustainability and recycled content and so on, yeah, absolutely. That's I think a fundamental in making that choice today. I'm not going to comment on the long-term life cycle cost. I think that sort of speaks to what Dawn had talked about in terms of the abuse and the longevity of the product, which is it's really its suitability for the space that it's in. We don't generally talk too much to the long-term life cycle cost, but we do select appropriate materials for a space and a function. Yeah.
And this is Dawn. I think Ed and I would feel similarly that Ed and I have both been in this profession for more than 20 years, and we have seen our palette change over time as concern about sustainability has come more to the forefront. So we now have a long list of various types of products, maybe that are even used into inside walls as various treatments within the rooms, in the way that we even deal with the HVAC systems in attenuating noise. We have changed our palette to really incorporate a lot more sustainable products because they are much more available now and becoming more mainstream, which is fantastic.
That's great.
The only thing I would add to that, this is Alana too, is that there's now a whole generation that is really educated with a completely different mindset of those of us who've had to re-engage and rethink about things, but they don't even consider things not to be, everything needs to be sustainable in their roles and their projects, and so they are going to be demanding a whole different set of materials and resources as they go out there, because it's just ingrained in them and how they think. So it's only going to get stronger, that requirements and those needs to be just good stewards of our environment, because that whole generation of designers and facility managers and architects, it's just how they think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things that the USGBC LEED system has done, is that it's just brought that vernacular and that thinking to everybody's design kickoff meetings for every project, and now it's just fundamental of how we do business.
That's great. I think we're coming up to our closing here. I really want to thank our experts, Christopher Pollack, Alana Dunoff, Edward Duggar, and Dawn Schutte. You guys provided some very unique insight to this. I think we've learned, and all the audience has to have learned, that there's a lot more than just STC ratings and find an NRC rating and pop it in a room and call it good. There's a lot more to consider. And I think you guys have done a great job of informing that how an acoustical expert can really be a benefit and a value to the job, to the project, and to the long-term goals, because that's what these buildings are supposed to do. They have a function, and if they don't function properly, what was the point? And I think the overall cost, I think it was Edward that brought up this, like just 1% to 2% of a whole project is to make the building functional is really worth that time and effort. I want to thank you. Any of the people that are listening and had questions, you can submit your questions, and we've been told you'll get an answer from one of the experts, or Robert Marshall would be glad to help back with that answer. I want to also thank our sponsor, CertainTeed, St. Gobain Ceilings, for putting this on informative webinar. I think it's been very informative. I know I learned a lot, and I just can't imagine how our audience didn't learn a lot from all you experts. Thank you all.